Good evening, everyone. As I said, I am a historian by training. I know Anthony Eden's work well. In fact, two foreign secretaries who are most highly regarded within the Foreign Service are Anthony Eden and Ernie Bevan, and their busts look at each other across the staircase in the Foreign Service back in the UK. So I don't intend to speak for a long time tonight, because I guess the most value for people here will come from the questions. But let me lay out extremely clearly a few pertinent points about what the UK vote to leave the EU means. Firstly, this was not the result the British government at the time wanted or campaigned for. But that is now completely irrelevant. The people have voted, and their choice was clear. With a majority of about 4% of the total vote, or about 1.5 million votes, the people of the UK voted to leave the European Union. That is now British government policy. This was an exercise in direct democracy, and while some might be disappointed or upset about the result, no one can complain about the fairness or the nature of the process. So, let me be clear. The UK will leave the European Union. That is what the people wanted, and their views must be respected. Theresa May, the new Prime Minister as of tomorrow, has confirmed that whenever she said, and I quote, "Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a success of it." It's also relevant to note a further comment she made about the UK needing to, quote, "forge a new role for ourselves in the world." And that's one of the jobs myself and my colleagues will now do. However, until we leave the EU, we will remain a full member, with all the responsibilities, all the obligations, but also all the rights that that membership brings. So we will continue to play a role and our part in the Union until we formally leave. There are some around the world who will no doubt be looking at the British decision and think it heralds a shrinkage or a reduction in the UK's influence and our power globally. Let me disabuse everyone of that thought at this stage. We are going absolutely nowhere. We will continue to play a leading role, and anyone who thinks otherwise is sadly deluded. Our position in the world is not based solely on our membership of the European Union. We remain a permanent member of the UN Security Council, one of only 5 such members. We are a member of the Commonwealth, the 5th largest economy of the world, a member of the G7 and G20, a member of NATO, and the only major country in the world to spend 2% of our GDP on defence and 0.7% on development. Our fundamental priorities remain the same. These include standing up for the rule of law and the international rules-based system, supporting the most disadvantaged, a commitment to peace and security, and the promotion of human rights. We will continue to do that, and we will continue to work with Guyana, the region, and our friends around the world on those shared values. There is a formal process to leave the EU, Article 50, which you've all heard about. But the decision on when that article will be invoked remains one for the new Prime Minister. She will decide when that decision is taken. When it begins, the process could well be long, could well be complicated, and could well be difficult. But it's important that we get it right. This is not something to rush into. Yes, we have all seen the markets unsettled. I now know that the pound in my pocket and the £100 the Chancellor talked about is no longer worth the same it was 2 weeks ago. But you know what? We knew that was going to happen, and it was prepared for. And fundamentally, the British economy is in a better place and has got strong foundations. In fact, a better place than it was before the global crash of 2007-2008. And indeed, the Governor of the Bank of England announced last week a £150 billion credit line for the banking sector in the UK. That does not strike me as a country that is weak economically. There has been one particularly negative aspect of this which needs to be addressed, and that is the upsurge in hate crime that we have seen following the referendum result. That won't be tolerated, and the police will crack down on it. The UK has a zero tolerance for such crimes. Ours is a proud, multicultural society. Look at me. I am not your average, or what people would automatically perceive to be, your average British High Commissioner. The people involved in these activities do not speak for me, and they do not speak for the majority of British citizens. My country remains an open and welcoming place to visit and to work. We also remain committed to Guyana. Prime Minister Cameron's, he still is Prime Minister till tomorrow, so Prime Minister Cameron's announcement last September of the Caribbean, what he termed the Caribbean pivot, and funding for the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund remains. That totals some £53 million. In addition to that, we have support on security sector reform, health, forestry and other areas. All that promised money will still be coming here. I have my 3 points, but I know I'm meant to be leaving those for later, Chancellor, so I'll stop there and say I'm, of course, happy to take any questions later. Thank you.
Let's invite Dr. Singh to respond to the question, what is Brexit all about? And we'll try to see if we can get some more chairs to accommodate guests who are still arriving.
Vice Chancellor, members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is very good to come after the High Commissioner, and I thank the Vice Chancellor for having arranged it that way. Because modern economics has moved somewhat away from its narrow focus on matters of equilibrium and resource allocation to its roots, really, in political economy. And one name that came up as I was thinking of political economy was naturally John Stuart Mill, the British political economist. So this evening, for this part at any rate, I'll talk briefly on those wider political economy interests that resonate with modern economics. And I'll start by reflecting a bit on the uncertainties that have been associated with Brexit. To answer the question, Brexit was a referendum, and I will comment on that after talking a little bit about the uncertainties. Well, regarding these uncertainties, I want to say, first of all, that prime ministers and presidents alike ought always to consider risk and uncertainty when making promises, announcements, and decisions. According to the New York Times of June 21, 2016, just before the referendum, Mr. Cameron, then British Prime Minister, made a promise to hold an in or out referendum on continued British membership in the EU to secure a short-term peace in the Conservative Party. But, the article continued, What seemed like a low-risk ploy to deal with a short-term political problem metastatized into an issue that could badly damage the British economy. Martin Wolf of the Financial Times, who spoke on that matter as well, also suggested that the referendum was the most irresponsible act by a British government in his lifetime. If the referendum itself, however, created uncertainties, we were hoping that the results, we meaning people who are interested in the matter and in the global economy, were hoping that the results might have calmed some of the storm. But unfortunately, that was not to be so, because there are many unanswered questions, as the High Commissioner mentioned. The timing of the exit, the nature of the UK's eventual relationship with the EU, the exact trading arrangements that will be negotiated, and even the future of the EU itself, to mention some of the obvious ones. The matter of who will be the next British PM has been settled. Parenthetically, I note that investors are nervous about uncertainty for clear reasons. When a decision, an investment decision, is made today without any assurance coming from the consumer sentiments or from the size of a potential market, the investor cannot have the reassurance needed to proceed with the investment decision. So essentially, investors don't like uncertainty. Unfortunately, as I've said, there is quite a bit of uncertainty remaining even after the Brexit result. While it's difficult to make predictions of what will eventually play out, however, there are a few things that we can say with confidence. The first was that whether Brexit would be good or bad, its timing was pretty lousy. The Economist, itself a British magazine, rather very conservative, had noted in April of this year 10 global risks, so to speak. That China would experience a hard landing, that Russia's intervention in Ukraine and Syria would precede a new Cold War, that currency volatility would culminate in an emerging markets corporate debt crisis, that Britain would leave the EU or vote to leave the EU, that Donald Trump wins the US presidential elections. These were 10 global risks. Rather, those were among the 10 global risks. Without going through all of them, this much I can say then, referring to those 10 risks. Of these, we can say, number one, that the Chinese economy is showing no signs of a strong recovery or any recovery, that there is more currency volatility with the euro, and rather, there is more currency volatility. Then, with the euro and free movement within the EU both under threat, two core benefits of remaining in the EU have been vitiated, making it even easier for the post-Brexit EU to begin to fracture. That was one of the risks. And one of the other risks had to do with increased jihad terrorism. My note is that there hasn't been a reduction necessarily in jihad terrorism around the world, but rather we have had recent and ugly episodes of terrorism, domestic terrorism in the United States. In other words, the risks have not been attenuated, those global risks. So for that reason, we can probably conclude that if Brexit was going to happen anyway, it could have happened at a different time. Then the hardcore economics of the matter include the consideration that there was a post-Brexit, even a pre-Brexit depreciation of the pound. And while that is good in that it enhances British competitiveness, stimulating export demand, it also cheapens British assets. making investors, foreign investors, want to buy UK assets. While that is a good thing, when it happened in the United States, with Japanese firms in particular buying up US assets, that fire sale of assets by US investors lost them control of US firms, and the very sentiment that drove, in this case, the Brexit referendum, UK independence, might be in fact compromised by the sale of assets due to the depreciation of the pound. Now, those are academic considerations, but I want now to turn to the referendum itself. The referendum was, in point of fact, a collective decision, and it was based on a particular collective decision-making rule. By the way, the question before British voters was the following: should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? Brexit, having been a referendum, was about collective decision-making, and in particular about majority rule or majoritarian principles. The Brexit referendum demonstrated that democracy, to the extent that it relies heavily on these majoritarian principles, is not inclusive and is even divisive. The high turnout Brexit referendum, in which the Leave and Remain percentages were respectively 51.89 and 48.11, commits the UK and Gibraltar to leave the EU on the basis of a 3.78% margin of the popular vote. Admittedly, these results were not as close as our own 2015 results, but I will mention the particular margin here. But they must be evaluated nonetheless from that significant fraction of the population that chose or would have liked Britain to remain. In other words, I'm saying, or I'm asking you, can we, on the basis of this result, say that the British people have spoken? It is, of course, easy to take this view because much of the respected and informed opinion in and out of the UK ruled the Brexit outcome and the winning by the Leave bloc. Less obvious is the academic and philosophical dissatisfaction with the so-called tyranny of the majority, famously described by Thomas Jefferson as mob rule, where 51% of the people may take away the rights of the other 49. Ken Rogoff, professor of economics and economic policy at Harvard, expressed this very concern about the Brexit referendum, considering especially that it constituted an irreversible and nation-defining decision. Writing in Project Syndicate, Rogoff said, "The idea that somehow any decision reached any time by majority rule is necessarily democratic is a perversion of the term. Modern democracies have evolved systems of checks and balances to protect the interests of minorities and to avoid making uninformed decisions that have and might have catastrophic consequences." But if this anxiety about the democratic despotism, as the classical writers call it, the democratic despotism of majority rule seems a bit narrow, we ought to recall that Nobel economist Ken Arrow was pessimistic that there would be any collective decision rule that would satisfy a number of reasonableness criteria. Majority rule is indeed a collective decision-making rule, and it throws up a result. But it can and often does violate basic principles of consistency. And if it results rather in victory for an unchanging majority, the result might be patently unfair. Moreover, if that majority lacked information, knowledge, morality even, then majority decisions could be fundamentally unreasonable. Alternatively, there's another collective decision-making rule that could be invoked, and that is dictatorship, if you will. It does throw up a collective decision aggregating people's preferences. So alternatively, rather than majority rule, there could be a dictator or a consensus builder or a funding or overseas development agency or even civil society that would effectively impose a preferred position on everyone else, violating Arrow's non-dictatorship axiom. So be it majority rule or some other collective decision-making rule, democracy would continue to elude us unless we take deliberate steps to consider the views of the other 48% or 49%, or for that matter, 5%. As emphasized by John Stuart Mill, this would entail encouraging debate and even dissension, and the creation of political institutions that sought out an intelligent, educated minority, and especially a diversity of opinions, not relegated to letters in the newspapers, a diversity of opinions to act as a countervailing force against the tyranny of an elected majority that identifies with and shares a common but partial set of ideas, tastes, experiences, and even values and histories. Thank you very much.
Now, you can do better than that for Thomas Singh. Come on, give Dr. Thomas Singh a hearty round of applause.